If by this point you're a little overwhelmed by wonky economic language, never fear. I'm joined by economist and former market trader Gary Stevenson to make it all make sense. Gary, thank you so much for coming back on the show. First of all, from first principles, what is a government bond?
Okay, so the first thing to understand is when the government borrows money, it borrows money from people, from things like pension funds, from wealthy individuals. And when you lend money to the government, you get a government bond. And basically that's tradable. So I can lend money to the government and then sell the government bond, and then somebody else will be owed the money. So essentially, it's a tradable IOU from the government.
So why has there been this movement in the market where the value of British government bonds has dramatically decreased?
It's completely a response to the announcement from the government, basically. So if you look at what the government has done, in the last 3 years, there's been a massive, massive increase in government debt. But that was a one-off emergency because of COVID. And now, suddenly, out of nowhere, the government has decided that they're going to do this bonfire on taxes of the richest. Traders look at that and they basically think, okay, well, if you're not going to tax the rich people who have all the wealth, you're not going to be able to pay the debt back. And that basically leads to sort of, essentially, the reason governments can take large debts is because the economy grows and because there's inflation. When inflation happens, it devalues the debt and makes it easy to pay back. Traders and economists don't believe this is going to have any growth. So they're saying, really, the government is going to have to do one of two things, which is not pay the debt back or create inflation. And they sell the pound because if there's going to be inflation, pounds are worth less. That means there will be inflation because when the pound collapses, imports become more expensive, which means the central bank, who has a job to control inflation, will then have to raise rates. And markets are expecting a massive increase in interest rates. So traders, they look at the central bank and they think, well, these guys are going to raise rates massively. So why am I going to hold government bonds that give me 3% when the central bank is expected now to raise rates to 5, 6, or even 7%?
It seems like the big event that sort of forced the Bank of England to make this dramatic intervention was the potential for a run dynamic on pension funds. So what would a run dynamic on pension funds be? Why would that be caused by a loss of value in government bonds?
Okay, so let's explain this from basics. Okay, so obviously lots of people have money in a pension, and a big investment that a lot of pension funds do is to buy government bonds. Now, some pension funds, in order to sort of boost their buck and get a little bit more bang for their money, they borrow money to buy even more government bonds. So that way you can borrow cheaply, you buy more government bonds, you can get a little bit extra return. Now, especially in the last month, but in the whole of the last year, because Bank of England interest rates have been rising, the value of bonds have been steadily falling because now interest rates have been nearly zero for the last 10, 15 years. That means that a lot of these bonds have very, very low interest rates. Now, if the central bank is going to start paying 3, 4, 5, 6% on cash, you don't want to be holding a zero interest government bond. So traders have been selling these government bonds. Pension funds who have borrowed money to buy loads of government bonds are suddenly in a situation where you've borrowed £1 million, you've bought £1 million of government bonds, and those bonds are only worth £900,000, £800,000 now. So the people who lent the money are turning around to them and saying, okay, well, we need you to front up some more money because we don't trust you anymore because the assets you hold are not worth enough. Well, then that means the pension funds, to pay that money, have to sell the bonds, which drives the bond price down even further. And you can get this vicious spiral where institutions such as pension funds continually have to sell the asset in order to pay back the debt, which drives the price further and further down, and the price keeps falling and these institutions can go bankrupt.
So they call that the doom loop, don't they? So the value is falling, so they have to sell it to convert it to cash. That makes the value fall even more. So then they need to sell it more, and the Bank of England's intervention was to try and stop this doom loop happening. So the Bank of England, they have the power to print lots of money, and they've intervened. They've said, look, if no one wants to buy these bonds, so the price is falling, what we're going to do is we're going to buy loads of them. That will push up demand. That will push up the price to a point where these pension funds aren't in danger. Makes sense. If you're the one institution that can very easily print money and intervene in the market, I can see why they've done it. Is there a problem here? Why should we be worried that the Bank of England has printed a load of money to buy government bonds?
I mean, this goes back to the thing I've been saying a lot whenever I've done media in the last couple of years, right? Which is whenever the Bank of England prints a ton of money, especially when it's a lot of money, and whenever the government gives out a lot of money, you need to be asking where that money is going to end up. So essentially, what we have here is a situation where the government has slashed taxes on rich people. This is after the 3 years which have seen the biggest and fastest ever increase in millionaire and billionaire wealth in the country, okay? The government has now slashed taxes on them. The market has said, well, we think that makes you financially unsustainable, so we're basically going to pull the plug on you. And the Bank of England is basically coming in and funding it. So now you have a situation where the Bank of England is essentially funding a massive cash transfer from the government to the rich on the back of the biggest ever cash transfer we've ever seen from the government to the rich. And I want to put some numbers on this, because I think it's amazing. I don't think people realize, if you were to tax the wealthy enough now to make them as rich as they were before COVID started, you could give every single adult in the country £12,000. And that is before the energy stimulus, which is another £150 billion to the energy companies, and before the massive tax cuts for millionaires. So what you're seeing here is a continuation of a systemic issue where the government and the central bank together are pumping hundreds of billions of pounds to the rich. And the consequence for ordinary people is that prices go up and inflation goes up and ordinary people's standard of living decreases. You cannot expect to see the fastest ever increase in inequality in the history of the country and not see living standards for ordinary people fall. So I really want people to push back against this.
And I want your thoughts on the IMF. So, historically, when the IMF have come up on Novara Media, it will be to critique them. They're normally, thought of as an institution that enforces free market policies on countries. What they normally want to do is cut spending, and IMF programs normally dramatically increase inequality, especially in debtor countries. So you might think of Argentina or Greece or many countries in Africa and Asia over the years. Why are they suddenly concerned about inequality? Why have the IMF released a statement which says we've got a problem with what Kwasi Kwarteng has announced because it will increase inequality?
Plainly and simply, because people are looking at what the government is doing now and thinking that it is completely insane. It is completely unsustainable. You cannot run massive deficits permanently. Normally when you see countries try and do this, run really big deficits for a long term, it's because of some sort of external disaster or some sort of really serious situation which requires an immediate stimulus. For example, COVID. Now you've got a government that is trying to do this purely in the service of giving an absolute ton of money to millionaires. I mean, I'm talking to traders in the city, and the biggest question here is what do they think they are doing? And we're torn between working out, are they crazy or are they stupid? And the IMF is thinking that, I've been in markets for a long time. I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen anybody tear their country's finances apart for something as ridiculous as a massive injection of cash to the richest people in the country. I've never seen anybody do it. And it's not just me, it's me, the IMF, it's everybody in the markets just looking at these guys and asking them, what are they trying to do? It's crazy.
And what should happen now? I mean, I've said the Prime Minister, the Chancellor are, nowhere to be seen. They seem to be a bit flummoxed. It seems like they're kind of rabbits in headlights. They didn't realise that their announcement on Friday would cause such a dramatic reaction. I mean, what could they do to stabilise the markets? Or are they just going to, keep quiet and hope the Bank of England sort of does the hard work for them?
Okay, something has to give here. And the reason that something has to give is because in the last week, we've seen a massive increase in interest rates. And that is going to cause an enormous increase in the interest rates of mortgages. Okay, so, mortgages in the last few years have been pretty low. People have been getting mortgages 1.5%, 2%. In the next couple of years, if nothing is done to deal with this, mortgage rates are going to go up to 6%, 7%, 8%. It's just completely unsustainable given the level of house prices and the size of people's mortgages, especially young people who have bought recently, who have very large mortgages. There's no way they can afford these on top of the increase in energy prices, the increase in food prices. This is literally going to be this could be in many cases an extra £1,000, £1,500 a month. People don't have that. So something has to give, and it's very difficult to understand what, because if the government is going to do this, then interest rates will be high like that. It's as simple as that. And it's politically unsustainable. So either the government has to back down, which, they're stubbornly saying they won't, but I think it's quite possible in the end they may be forced to, or they need to force the central bank to massively support them to keep interest rates low, despite the fact that inflation is probably going to be very high. So in that case, what you'll probably see is another big increase in inflation and a collapse in the pound. So there's no good options here other than the government backing down. And, we need to do whatever we can to try and force them to do that.
So something's got to give. You're in agreement with the IMF. Everything's getting very strange, all very topsy-turvy. Gary, thank you so much for your insight today. We'll get you back on soon, I'm sure. And everyone in our audience, you can check out Gary's YouTube channel, which we've linked to in the description box below. Lots of great explainers of very complicated economics.